Hardly anywhere in Germany gets as much rain as the region called the Bergisches Land. A blessing from above? Water serves both man and beast. Water has always powered the economy. The traditional cultivated landscape here is rich in streams and rivers, and full of life. Modern invaders feel as much at home here as long-established warriors. Embedded in its dense forests are many lakes, man-made but a magnet for countless creatures that have become rare elsewhere. Gently rolling hills characterize the Bergisches Land. The name, though, doesn't come from Berg, meaning mountain, but from the Counts of Berg. The castle, Schloss Burg on the River Wupper near Solingen, was their ancestral home from the 12th to the 14th century, before they moved their residence to Düsseldorf. What remain are the name, the castle, a popular tourist attraction, and the Wupper, the best known of the region's 2,000 or so rivers and streams. Few regions in Europe are as verdant as the Bergisches Land. It belongs to the Rhenish Slate Mountain Range, on which the heavy rain clouds from the North Sea and the Atlantic release their precipitation. Since 1945, it's been a part of North Rhine-Westphalia. The region extends from the Rhine Valley in the west to the Sauerland in the east, and from the Rhein-Sieg district in the south to the Ruhr district in the north. 13 reservoirs are kept topped up by the rain in the Bergisches Land. The best known, thanks to a beer advertisement, is the Wieltal Reservoir in the southeast. The clear waters of the man-made lake are home to many fish species. But they have to keep their wits about them. Down below, the pike is lurking. And up above, the great crested grebe. It can dive over 30 meters and hold its breath for nearly a minute, time enough to hunt out fish hiding among the water plants. Up above, the female is waiting to be relieved. The pair take it in turns to incubate the eggs. Frogs are also part of the grebe's prey. Depending on the temperature, tadpoles take 2 to 3 months after hatching to develop into young frogs. Their journey through the lake is fraught with dangers. The black stork is just one of them. But it prefers to go after bigger prey, like fish and fully grown frogs. Black storks feed mainly on animals living in the water or at its edges, which makes them much more like the grey heron than their cousins the white storks. The water-rich Bergisches Land is the perfect habitat for black storks. There are plenty of dense forests here too, which these timid birds need for breeding. Every nest full of chicks is part of a success story, because the black stork was extinct for over 100 years in the whole of the Rhineland and Westphalia. The first ones reappeared in the 1980s. There are now about 20 pairs breeding in the upper Bergisches Land alone, the eastern part of the region. Both parents feed their young with a pre-digested mush of all sorts of water creatures. Their neighbour seems less than pleased at all the air traffic on his doorstep, although he is more of a danger for the young black storks than the frog catchers are for the owl brood. In past years, there were young black storks living in this nest. The owl had the advantage of not being a migratory bird, which this one took advantage of and moved into the ready-made nest in early spring. When the rightful owners returned from Africa, they found it occupied and had to relocate. Owls, of the typical owl family, are usually active at dusk and at night. But with hungry chicks to feed, they sometimes go hunting earlier. The Vieltal Reservoir holds nearly 33 million cubic meters of water and is one of the more recent reservoirs, completed in 1973. The Oechsenshammer Mill, near Engelskirchen, in contrast, is historic testimony to the fact that water has long been the driving force behind economic development in the Bergisches Land. The water wheel here was for driving not millstones, but forging hammers. In today's museum, visitors can experience what work used to be like here. The furnace man prepares the workpiece and ensures that the steels are kept hot. The blacksmith shapes the tool with the water-driven hammer. And the sluice operator regulates the amount of water flowing over the mill wheel, according to the speed the smith needs. It takes coordinated teamwork for everything to run smoothly. 30 iron hammer works used to operate along a 12-kilometre stretch of the River Leppe, which itself is only a good 19 kilometres long. In an eroded river bank, young kingfishers are waiting for their next feed. The nest cavity, they can be up to 80 centimetres deep, has been hollowed out by the parent birds using just their beaks. Their work is never done. They now have to dive tirelessly for fish, and only 1 in 10 fishing attempts is successful. Each nestling gets about 1 fish an hour. With 4 chicks, that comes to about 40 fish just for the young ones. Including failed attempts, that means up to 400 dives a day. These flying gems conduct a monogamous pairing and share the strenuous work of feeding between them. For a family of pygmy owls, Germany's smallest type of owl, the division of roles is rather different. During the breeding season, it's the male that feeds the family. The female is already waiting. The rest is now his job. All the young are already hatched. In size, they could easily fit into egg cups. The female feeds the young while the male hunts for replenishment. Goldcrests, the smallest of Germany's songbirds, are a particular favourite of the pygmy owls. It takes a while for the female to divide up the prey into beak-sized pieces. Thanks to the heavy rainfall, lots of forest ponds and bogs have formed in the Bergisches Land. The grass snake is sometimes called the ring snake from its neck markings. It likes swampy surroundings and hunts both on land and in the water, mainly for amphibians, but also for small mammals. A harvest mouse checks if the coast is clear again. It seems reluctant to venture out. Its fellow harvest mouse, 1 floor lower, apparently hasn't noticed the snake. Harvest mice feed mainly on grass seeds. They can even digest dry grasses. It's taken just 1 night for the harvest mouse to weave its spherical nest from grass stalks. He keeps checking that everything's still waterproof. There could well be rain again soon. Small animals have a high metabolism and need to eat almost non-stop. The other mouse continues its interior refurbishment. The dry food has given it a thirst. Now it's clear why the mouse was so cautious. Her nursery is full. This is already her third litter. Harvest mice have up to 6 litters a year. Meanwhile, the neighbour is demonstrating that harvest mice are not pure vegetarians. The mother is feeling a bit crowded. Harvest mice are loners and really get upset when neighbours don't maintain social distancing. Fire-bellied toads like to spawn in small ponds that sometimes dry up for longer periods. The advantage of this is that there are hardly any fish to eat up the offspring. Ponds like this often attract whole colonies of tube worms. They live on the bottom of the pond in tubes they build from mucus and sediment. It's their rear end that sticks out of the tube, and the longer it is, the less oxygen there is in the water. Their swirling movement is an attempt to waft in more oxygen-rich water. Worms that protrude too far are running a risk. Veritable veterans of the Earth's history lie in wait for the worms. The triops, the three-eyed living fossil, is regarded as the oldest type of animal in the world. They were already floating through the Earth's fresh waters as long ago as 220 million years. The tube worm doesn't give in easily to its adversary. For their size, many worms are among the strongest creatures in the world. Like all crustaceans, the triops sheds its shell from time to time as it grows. They don't have much time to ensure the arrival of the next generation. Their watery home will soon dry out. They have up to 70 pairs of legs, with which they dig out hollows in the sand for laying their eggs. When the pond water disappears, so do they, but not their offspring. What are known as resting eggs can survive for over 20 years. When the pond fills up again, the larvae hatch out, develop into crustaceans within 2 weeks, and must then make haste to provide once again for the next generation. Obviously, a highly successful strategy. Less successful in the survival stakes was the Eibach-moated castle from the 14th century in the Lindlar district of the Upper Bergisches. After a fire in the 18th century, nature quickly reclaimed its territory. Water had served as protection against aggressors since time immemorial. In the moat here, carp were introduced, as was often the case. Neuenberg Castle, which is also near Lindlar, was built by the Counts of Berg in the 12th century and destroyed by Swedish forces in the 30 Years' War. Today, the ruins once again have a lord of the castle. Its offspring have already moved out and made their way on foot, as is typical of young owls, to another hiding place in a tree root. maybe not the best choice. They're easy prey here on the ground for foxes and badgers. The forests in the Bergisches Land offer many places to hide for a wide variety of young animals. This young raccoon has survived its earliest dangers and is boldly exploring the world, quickly followed by its sibling. The small bears are the descendants of escaped raccoons, which were introduced from North America for fur farming in the 1920s. Since then, they've spread slowly but surely throughout most of Germany. In the Bergisches Land, too, they're advancing strongly. The mother keeps a close eye on her adventurous youngsters. The more the young animals explore, the better they'll be at coping on their own later. Childhood curiosity is a strategy for survival. What's that in the bush? Mother coming back? But she smells quite different. And she's so chubby. Its nose tells the youngster it's not a relative, although its forebears also came from animals grown for their fur. The raccoon dog was brought to the Ukraine from China and has since made its way further and further west. For some years, it's also established itself in the Bergisches Land. The young raccoon shows no fear, and it's in luck. Raccoon dogs mainly hunt smaller prey. By now, the black storks have grown significantly and are gradually turning from white into black storks. Their appetite is also growing by the day. Tirelessly, the parents have to keep the food coming. The neighbours' young have already left the nest and are hiding somewhere until they're fledged. The young storks, on the other hand, are not built for climbing and have to wait until they can fly. Water is everywhere in the Bergisches Land. In some places there are still alluvial forests with old branches of rivers. If the water level rises, trees which can't stand in water die off. That's good for stag beetles. They need dead wood for their brood. But how to get past the rival to reach the female? She's preparing for mating. The tree sap contains certain fungi, which the beetle needs for her reproductive cells to mature. The male's antlers look impressive, but are no good for cutting. But thanks to the female's work, it can now also strengthen its virility. From up above, the scent of the female energizes the rivals. But one of them has to go. It now becomes clear that the antlers can come in useful. All clear. The loser doesn't give up. But inevitably he's too late. The female will lay the fertilized eggs in the soil at the roots of dead trees. The larvae feed off the dead wood for between 5 and 8 years before they transform into fully fledged beetles. And then, after just 1 month in all their glory, their life is over. Over many centuries, the Begicious land has been shaped by human beings. The lush grassland is well suited for pasture. Wildlife does not need a wilderness, at least much less than is often thought. The fox is one wild animal that manages very well in cultivated landscapes. The fields provide young foxes with ample mice for food and room for playing. They move away from their mother more and more, and soon set out on their path to independence. In boisterous play, they train themselves in everything they'll need in the future. In a few weeks, the siblings will split up and search out their own territory. As typical adapters to human intervention, they even cope well with city life. They'll have no trouble at all in finding their place in the Begicious land. Not far away, a veritable giant soars up to the heavens. Altenberg Cathedral is one of the landmarks of the Begicious land. Building began in the mid-13th century, so it's the same age as Cologne Cathedral, though it was completed much earlier. It serves not only the faithful. Kestrels have made themselves at home here. They too are excellent adapters to the human environment. Their name in German means tower falcons, reflecting their preference for tall buildings. Originally cliff dwellers, they use them nowadays as breeding places. This pair is not alone. One floor further down, a second male has just arrived back with prey and calls for its mate. It's getting a bit crowded for the first pair. Kestrels sometimes breed in colonies, but that doesn't mean that things are always harmonious. Not easy to keep your composure with so much commotion. The message is clear. This is our place. Pair number one has clearly got the message and concentrates again for the time being on more important things. The cathedral was built on the banks of the River Dun. Perhaps this is the real River Duna of the Nibelung saga, and not the Danube. The Dun flows into the Wupper, the river that has most shaped the Bergisches Land since time immemorial. Like most rivers, it begins as a small stream, or rather as many small streams. It has 40 or so sources. The rivulets unite in the Wipper, as the river's called for its first 15 kilometers, its maiden name as it were. In its upper reaches, it's crystal clear, before being subjected to quite a bit of pollution further down. Wash your hands before eating. Appearances are deceptive. The female raccoon is neither washing its paws nor its food. Its sensitive palms are feeling the riverbed for shellfish, snails, and other delicacies. The young raccoon, too, has no fear of water. It doesn't even need to swim here, though it's a good swimmer when it needs to be. Raccoons avail themselves of anything they can get their paws on, from plants and insects to birds, mice, toads, and fish. The young raccoon is already skilled at the hand-washing ritual. It's close to water that the small bear with the highwayman's mask feels most at home. There's so much to discover here. Near the town of Radevormwald, the Wipper has already turned into the Wupper. Here it's still showing its changeable, natural face. There's nothing to indicate that further along its course it will flow through one of the most densely populated landscapes in Germany. For some years now, though, a homecomer has been gnawing away at the standard image of this landscape. In the daytime, we just see the fruits of its labors. Usually it only appears itself at dusk and at night. For a century, the beaver was regarded as extinct in the Bergisches Land. Its fur was much sought after. Then in April 2017, the producer of this documentary, the wildlife filmmaker Sigurd Tescher, who died in January 2020, reported the sighting of a beaver in the Wupper. This large rodent had swum past the lens of a night vision camera set up by his cameraman Ralf Steinberg. The beaver seems very much at home and has since been sighted at many other places as well. In summer, it mainly eats green vegetation. It's usually in winter that the beaver takes up its logging activities in order to get at the bark of twigs. It's highly likely that the Wupper beavers come from animals that were released into the wild in the Eifel region in the 1980s. so they must have crossed the River Rhine at some point. No great problem for these outstanding swimmers. In many places, hammer mills still recall the former heyday of forges. The disused mill ponds attract amphibians like the fire salamander. Hilbert's mill on the Leyenbach was still producing shear steel or refined iron up to 1943. The hammer is now preserved as an engineering monument. The fire salamander is something of a straggler in one of the most spectacular animal migrations in the Bergisches Land. In spring, the amphibians migrate to small bodies of still water and give birth to their young underwater. They don't lay down spawn like most amphibians. For 4 months, the young live in the water and breathe through their crest-like gills. Then they're ready for shore leave. In Wuppertal, the biggest town in the Bergisches Land, with its famous suspension railway, the salamanders wouldn't stand much of a chance among the streets and buildings. But just a few kilometers downriver, the Wupper shows its idyllic side again. Near Solingen, it flows past the Diedrichs Temple up on the hill. And then comes the next landmark. The Mungsten Bridge spans the Wupper Valley between Remscheid and Solingen. At a height of 107 meters, it's Germany's highest railway bridge. Before it was built, trains had to take a detour of 44 kilometers to reach Solingen. The raccoons, of course, have long since discovered this part of the Wupper for themselves too. The youngster still hasn't got its balance quite right and returns to its mother for reassurance. But it won't be long now till it's making its own way through life. Raccoons are very happy to take care of the crayfish in the river, which is very welcome for conservationists. Most of the Wupper crayfish are descended from an American species, which is endangering indigenous species through an imported disease. In the north of the Bergisches Land, near Wülfrath, a completely new rocky landscape has been created by man since the end of the 19th century. Eons ago, there was a tropical ocean here, where corals built up huge reefs. Their fossilized remains, in the form of limestone and dolomite rock, are still being quarried today. The clear waters of the decommissioned quarries are home nowadays to a host of perch. The man-made lakes have become a natural paradise, as have the rocky slopes surrounding them. The owl has long understood that its young are very well protected here. The disadvantage, On the cliff face, unlike in trees, the young can only leave the nest using their own wing power. Flying is one thing. Finding a safe landing place is something else. The last one doesn't want to be left alone. That takes courage. We've been doing that for ages. Apart from water, it's forest that typifies the Bergisches Land today. It takes up about a third of the area. The forest management is increasingly moving from spruce to deciduous trees. And in more and more places, it's leaving dead trees to rot naturally. On the edges of the deciduous forests, hazel bushes are spreading again. Good news for the hazel dormouse. Blackberries are also on the menu, along with the nuts. The sugary fruits are ideal for putting on a layer of fat, ready for hibernation. And it's a long hibernation here, at least 7 months. Actually, the hazel dormouse is a relative of the edible dormouse, both rodents noted for their long months of sleep in winter. This creature is still relatively rare in the Bergisches Land, because species-rich forest edges and hedges are only gradually increasing. As recently as 150 years ago, there was much less forest in the Bergisches Land than there is today. For one thing, the many forges needed large quantities of charcoal. Then there was mining and wood pasturage. Broad areas of forest disappeared. Heath and moorland spread. Nowadays, heathland areas are rare and add variety to the landscape. Very different animals can live here than in the forests. Different plants grow, producing different fruit. From time immemorial, heathland has resulted from human activity. Now it's humans who are ensuring their survival, preventing them from reverting to forest. That's how warmth-loving species like the sand lizard have found a home in the Bergisches Land. They feed on insects and spiders and are especially fond of fat grubs. The male wears a bright green garb, whereas the female and the young are more soberly dressed. Dew on plants generally provides all they need to drink. As cold-blooded animals, they have to fill up on warmth, especially in the morning hours, until the next shower comes along. At least 800 millimeters of rain falls in the Bergisches Land every year, up to 1,500 millimeters in the uplands. The arrival of autumn is usually heralded by downpours. When the clouds roll by, the Bergisches Land emerges again in all its beauty. The autumn rains fill up the streams that have dwindled to a trickle in summer and ensures replenishment, at least until now. In times of climate change, the dry periods are lasting longer, the rainfall is heavier. Some animals will disappear, others will be added. So far, the Vieltal Reservoir can still fulfill its task and supply around 200,000 people with drinking water. The feathered anglers also find ample food here for most of the year. Meanwhile, the young black storks have also joined in, recognizable by their dark beaks. It won't be till next year before they're as bright red as their parents. They need to build up their strength for a long journey. The grey heron will spend the winter here. But the black storks will soon be heading off to Africa. Just a few weeks later, the landscape has lost its flamboyant autumn colour. Winter comes early in the Bergisches Land and transforms it into a frosted wonderland. The damp air means that mist and hoarfrost are particularly frequent. Where it rains a lot, it also snows quite often too, at least as long as it's cold enough. Winter in the Bergisches Land is relatively mild, typical of regions where the climate is shaped by the Atlantic. It's rare for the streams to freeze over completely. Raccoons don't hibernate. At this time of year, when plants are wizened, berries and nuts have been eaten up, mice are tucked away under the snow, and birds' nests are empty. They're very much dependent on the streams. An albino tawny owl, a genuine rarity, watches the raccoon's efforts. Raccoons are masters of adaptation and have long moved into towns and cities as well. But landscapes like the Bergisches Land correspond most closely to their natural requirements. Wherever they can, whenever they wish, they prefer to live near water and feed on all it has to offer. Some scientists believe that a raccoon's paws become even more sensitive when they're wet, so they're even better able to feel for food. Things only really get difficult if the streams actually freeze solid, but climate change makes that more and more unlikely. For the American immigrant, the Bergisches Land is an ideal new home, whether it's welcome here or not. Water and forest, half-timbered buildings, slate, tradition and a rich animal kingdom. A region in which so much is combined, naturally. The Bergisches Land.